Super Mario 3D World!
I feel like it was inevitable that 3D Mario would eventually regress into trying to capture the spirit of a 2D Mario game. And when looking back at the games that came out before the release of 3D Land and 3D World, it becomes more obvious. 64 had a few linear stages, all of which that were about more than just getting to the end were not that good. Sunshine had a few more of these, about 1 or 2 per stage, that were all focused on getting to the end with a secondary mission to grab all of the red coins. Galaxy completely shifted the level design focus from exploration to a linear obstacle course philosophy, while still keeping the overall sandbox structure, which I don't think entirely worked in that game's favor, but I already complained about that in the previous part. Galaxy 2 shifted the focus even more with a world map that made the hub world entirely pointless. With the next generation of Nintendo being easily one of their weakest ever, both financially as well as the only series they would actually take a bold risk with, being Zelda, and it all adds up to these 2 games' release being incredibly obvious. But that's not to say that they're bad. 3D Land may be the weakest 3D game, but it's still an enjoyable romp. And 3D World is, in my opinion, an underrated gem and easily the second best Wii U game behind Splatoon. Let's be honest, despite the port being something made in under a year, Breath of the Wild is a Switch game. Also, this will be a relatively short video since I don't have that much to say about either of these games. So without any more babbling, let's get into this Super Mario 3D Land and 3D World retrospective.
Let's go!
These 2 games are for sure the most Mario-feeling 3D Marios in the entire lineup. 64 also felt pretty standard, but it also played differently than its predecessors. Sunshine was a fun little tropical adventure with a more involved story. The Galaxy games, more so the first game, were grand intergalactic adventures, and Odyssey is a fun road trip where you get to meet a variety of interesting races as well as having nearly every kingdom have a different unique art style and color palette. They all feel like Mario games, but they go above and beyond to feel distinct and unique from generic Mario. These games don't try that hard to break up the status quo of what you would expect from a typical Mario experience, though 3D Land definitely tries a lot less. There are very few original ideas in this game, if any at all. Everything here is either a remix of an idea from another Mario game or just a straight up reuse of an idea from another Mario game. The way that they handle Bowser kidnapping Peach is pretty neat, with Bowser sending a postcard of her current condition at the end of every world, but that's about the only interesting thing that it does that's distinctly from this game. 3D World, on the other hand, manages to have a unique feeling, even if still being fairly close to the traditional Mario experience. Bowser kidnaps the Sprixie so that you can play as Peach, the clear pipes that allow you to move around and are used pretty effectively throughout the game. The boss is not all being Boom Boom and the Koopalings. I mean, sure, you do still fight Boom Boom, but there are also plenty of unique bosses. On top of that are the 2 new power-ups, which both fundamentally change how you approach the levels, and the final world being a giant amusement park rather than the usual fire world. It's not enough to make it match the other Marios I mentioned, but it is enough for it to stand out from something like the new Super Mario Bros. Games. Then you have the music, and 3D Land soundtrack is perfectly fine. The main theme is catchy enough, perfect for that pick up and play vibe that the game is going for. The Bowser's theme is intense, but nowhere near as good as the Bowser themes from 64 or Galaxy. The Beach theme is the best original piece from the game. It's the one that I listen to the most by far. 3D World completely annihilates this game's soundtrack though. The main theme is an absolute bop, as is the athletic theme. The circus theme has a wonderful vibe. The mansion theme is just a better version of the same composition from 3D Land. I love how the violin sounds. Same for Snowball Park, it sounds like a Christmas village. Histocrat might just be the best boss theme in the entire series, and one of the best boss themes of any game ever. The beach theme makes me feel less dead inside, as does Double Cherry Pass. Champions Road has the better version of the Gusty Garden Galaxy theme, yeah, I said it. And the list of incredible tracks just goes on and on. It is easily the best Mario soundtrack to date. To prove this, I'll just play a quick portion of Bowser's theme from this game. It's just so freaking good. Like, I'd love to enter a level, but I'm too busy vibing. Bowser's theme from 64 is pretty good, and Galaxy's was grand and epic. And while I don't immediately think of this particular theme when thinking of Bowser themes, it is by far the one I listen to the most. This brings us to the controls, don't ask how. I'm not the biggest fan of how either of these games play, but let's start with 3D Land, because wow is this game bare bones. You can run, jump, wall jump, side jump, and backflip. Technically you can long jump, but it just doesn't feel that good. The momentum feels off and you don't even go that far. And for whatever reason I got rid of the triple jump, which was even in the new Super Mario Bros. Games. And it's not like Sunshine where they at least replaced the long jump with something. Its absence is jarring and it makes the game feel weird to play. The same things I just said also apply to 3D World, but this game does improve pretty well from its predecessor.
For one, the speed and flow feels a lot better.
Specifically in the Switch port that I played for this video. While I will be saving Bowser's Fury for a different video that is sadly not a part of this retrospective anymore, I still wanted to bring this version up because the characters have all been made much speedier. Everything just feels a lot snappier than in the original, and that makes everything else feel better. On top of this, the rolling long jump feels great to pull off, as opposed to 3D Land, which felt mostly serviceable. There's the ground pound jump, which feels a little off thanks to Odyssey, but once you get used to it, it's pretty handy. On top of this are the different playable characters. You can play as Luigi in 3D Land as well, but he's just typical Luigi, nothing special. 3D World gives you a legitimate reason to pick different characters. Mario is the balanced pick, Luigi is typical Luigi, except he can scuttle to descend a bit slower. Peach can flow for a bit after jumping and is also unbearably slow in the original release of the game. She's as fast in the Switch version as Toad was in the Wii U version, which makes me more inclined to actually pick her. Toad runs the fastest, but also does everything but sprint the fastest as well. The cool one is Rosalina, who has a spin attack from Galaxy, but is otherwise tied with Peach with everything else. There's also the power-ups, another area which 3D Land is absolutely destroyed. There's the returning stuff, the Tanuki Leaf being the most notable one. Since it's a 3D game, it makes sense that it would be nerfed a bit, with it allowing for a slower fall rather than flight. The newer power-ups in the game are not good. The propeller box is just an inferior propeller suit from New Super Mario Bros. Wii, and the boomerang flower, which is just an inferior fire flower. The only real use it has is collecting things from further away, but that's it. 3D World brings these power-ups back, and I feel the same way about each of them. But the newer power-ups that 3D World introduces are much better. The Super Bell turns you into Cat Mario, allowing you to pounce and climb walls. There's something about it that just makes platforming feel better, on top of the exploration potential that it unlocks. The other power-up is the Double Cherry, which duplicates you along with whatever power-up you currently have equipped. While this does make you a one-man army, it's also used for some green stars, with you having to keep all of your clones alive so that you can use these platforms. Both of them get great mileage and are used to their fullest potential. There's also the Koopa Shell, which isn't technically a power-up, but I don't care. You can enter Koopa Shell, and it's pretty similar to the Blue Shell from New Super Mario Bros. DS. So that's epic. Overall, 3D World is much better than 3D Land in every way imaginable when it comes to the presentation, but that doesn't mean that we can't give it a little gold star for trying. After all, one is for a console, while the other was for the 3DS. But being a biased loser is the whole point of this video, so I show absolutely zero remorse. On to the next section.
Let's go!
If there's one thing that's defined 3D World for 10 years, oh my gosh, it's been 10 years since the game released. Death comes for us all, doesn't it? Anyway, what it's been known for is the incredible level design. But in order to fully appreciate the beauty of this game's masterful design, we must first talk about 3D Land. When describing 3D Land's levels, it's hard to really put a finger on what exactly my thoughts are. They all just kind of blend together. They are Mario stages through and through. It's definitely got solid platforming, but there's really nothing that makes it special. Sunshine has Flood, the Galaxy games have Gravity, Odyssey has Cappy, and we'll get to what makes 3D World much better in a moment. Even 64 gets a pass since it was the first 3D Mario game. This game mostly just relies on Mario staples, and there's really nothing of worth to note about any specific stage. Of course, there is the consideration of the console it was released on and what purpose it fulfills. The other 3D Marios are console games, and were all developed with that specific mindset. 3D Land has to be something that you can pick up and play for a few minutes, or something that can pass the time on a long car ride. 3D Land stages are fairly short and condensed, and they flow together nicely to fit any specific length of time. The problem here comes from other 3DS games that Nintendo made that don't have the same approach to design in regards to short bursts or road trips. For instance, A Link Between Worlds. While putting the game down after a few minutes is a decent way to play the game, it feels like it was specifically made with the intent of longer play sessions. And I get that different games have different goals, but it's not like any of this really benefits 3D Land, especially when we compare it to 3D World. Despite not being my favorite 3D Mario game, I think that this game has easily the best platforming levels of any Nintendo game. Referring to 3D World here, I forgot to actually write that in the script. The whole thing is absolutely bursting with creativity. The first world is a tutorial world, with 5 of the stages being there to get you used to the platforming, a stage that introduces you to Plessy, and another that introduces Captain Toad's special levels. After that, the game starts getting really good, with every level having a new, interesting gimmick that it's centered around, outside of the Wii U gamepad gimmicks, which are never good or interesting. In one stage, you'll be avoiding conch doors, the next you'll be in a 2D level where everything is a shadow, the next will have a bunch of rolling hills, and they'll have an entire level that focuses on the Double Cherry. way. That's not even mentioning some of the more interesting ones, like the one that's inspired by Super Mario Kart, the one where you chase a flagpole down, the one that's designed to look like a Japanese dojo and uses the totally not useless Goomba mask, the auto-scroller that takes place on a moving platform that allows you to climb up the grades that unlocks a substantial portion of the level that has a completely different vibe to it, the one where there are a bunch of fuzzies that slowly climb up the level as you try to race them to the top, the ghost house that's pitch black and utilizes Lightbox, the level that has you having to stay on these blocks that flip and slide through the lava, and the list just goes on. There's so much variety here that keeps the drive to continue playing through the game, where its predecessor ends up feeling a little boring during big chunks and requires extended breaks in order to make continuing through it feel fresh and fun. In 3D World, there's only one stage in the entire main game that uses these red-blue panels that switch whenever you jump, forcing you to think about how you jump, which I think is a much more interesting way to take the original idea from Galaxy 2. In 3D Land, however, there are 3 stages throughout the game that use it, and the only thing that changes between them is that there's more obstacles to deal with. And I know this seems like a small point, but it really does go to show how much more engaging one of these games is in comparison to the other. And none of this is even taking into consideration the non-platforming based levels. Both games feature mystery houses, used to collect star medals and green stars by completing some challenge in a strict time limit. 3D Land decides to be stupid by putting a real-world time limit as to how many times you can do one, that time being 20 hours, which is a decision that doesn't make that much sense, but whatever. In general, I think that 3D World's challenges are more varied and interesting, though that's pretty much just the same as my thoughts on the game in general. The Pussy stages are pretty fun, but the real highlight are the Captain Toad stages. These things were so good that Nintendo made an entire spin-off based on them. They all take place in these dioramas without the ability to jump. This makes them decent little brain teasers. Nothing actually difficult or anything. They're so radically different from the rest of the game that they really work as breaks from the action. Obviously, I do think that Treasure Tracker does a much better job with this concept and goes way further with it, but for a series of side levels, 3D World does a great job with it. I didn't really know where to fit this into the section, so I'll just slide it in here. Sprawling Savannah is overrated. Like, wow, I'm actually getting to be in a boring, empty wasteland with almost nothing to do. 64, Sunshine, and Odyssey have actual game design, unlike this excuse for a level. It's weird to me that everyone seemed to adore this stage and how it made them dream of what an HD sandbox Mario could be back in the pre-Odyssey days. But you do you, I guess. Another thing that makes 3D World more engaging is how you go from level to level. 3D Land is a straight line, the most linear Mario game since the one that caused Nintendo to recode some random Famicom game because of how infuriatingly designed the original was. It's Toki Panic, baby, didn't know that one. Despite being a step up from the Galaxy games with the multiple star medals in every level, not being able to make any decisions in how you progress like in those games makes me wonder if requiring a certain number of star medals to be collected is entirely worth it. Unlike the Galaxy games, which felt like completing a series of obstacle courses instead of actually completing missions, I think that 3D Land wouldn't be as detrimentally harmed by a decision like this, considering that it's purely focused on being a course clear game, whereas the 2 Galaxy games were in this weird limbo state of wanting to be both a course clear and sandbox game. The exploration for these medals is pretty good though, even if some of them are really obvious. There are still the occasional ones that require more than 2 seconds of effort to grab. Anyway, the way that you access levels is really boring in terms of both presentation as well as the basic idea of it all being a literal straight line. 3D World is a vast improvement. First of all, there are the occasional branches, though it's not as significant as it could be. Sometimes on the level path there will be 2 stages that you can pick from, and beating either stage will allow you to progress. It gives a tiny bit of wiggle room, but not enough to be truly substantial. However, that doesn't matter, because in terms of presentation, it's great. You can freely move around and interact with certain objects like question mark blocks. There's something about it being visually similar to a shrunken down stage and selecting the next level by physically walking up next to it, as opposed to pressing right, that makes it feel way more engaging. On top of that, I just think that the collectibles are more interesting here. Green stars are hidden better and behind more creative obstacles that you need to overcome, and it helps introduce an element of exploration into every level. On top of this are another collectible, stamps. In the original release, they were used for Miiverse. I've never used Miiverse, so these were fairly worthless. In the swanky new Switch release, they're used for the new snapshot mode. That's fundamentally the exact same as the one in Odyssey, except this one you can paste these stamps onto stuff in the environment. Since there's only 1 per stage, they're usually a bit more well hidden than the green stars. It doesn't matter regardless, it's yet another thing to add exploration to already phenomenal platforming stages. Now take everything I just said about 3D World and toss it out because multiplayer is an entirely different game. Sure, it may have the same level design, but it's a different game. It's a beautiful, chaotic mess. Even with dedicated teamwork and maximum communication, there is still no guarantee that it won't devolve into madness. What was once a carefully crafted stage with platforming that forces you to think before you jump becomes nearly impossible as everyone's jumps activate all of the platforms. So it becomes a challenge and restraint as you try to prevent yourself from going for the person who sent you careening to your death's throat. There's a crown that utilizes the score that has never been useful for anything in any other Mario game until now, as everyone wants that crown. It's yet another thing that enforces the main theme of humanity's true nature. But the game uses the green stars and timer to make sure that while playing with others, it doesn't get too out of hand. Unless the timer had hardly any time on it, it always felt kind of worthless. But here it's there as a reminder that while you may throw your friends into the abyss for a good laugh, you do eventually have to get to the end. And the green stars force everyone to work together to make more progress through the game. It's wonderfully balanced, and it's yet another thing that I love about this game. Of course, this is all if you're playing with the right people. It's with a bunch of whiny brats, for instance, this perfectly balanced chaotic beauty quickly falls apart and becomes really frustrating as you deal with the constant complaining of people who don't understand that the stupidity of it all is the entire point of the multiplayer. That aside, 3D World is better than 3D Land in every way when it comes to the levels and how you access these levels, plus ratio.
Time.
The bosses in both of these games are ridiculously easy, as in some of them are on par with Mario 64 levels of ease. However, I would argue that they are at least far more interesting to fight than in 64, which is for sure a plus. 3D Land technically has 5 bosses, but in reality most of them are only different in that they have slightly different attacks. So it's more like there are 3 bosses in the game. Boom Boom will spin around the room and try to attack you, I guess. He'll either spin around or get into a shell. In the last fight with him, his spins will create flames, but it's not like that makes the fight any harder. Pom Pom will throw a boomerang at you and also hover in her shell to try and land on you. Again, these fights are more mechanically engaging than what was seen in 64, but that's not a high bar to clear. 3D World fares a lot better than its predecessor in regards to the bosses, much like how it does in every other aspect. There's the boss Boulder, which has you needing to throw a regular Boulder at him as he attempts to roll over you. It's enjoyable enough despite being a total cakewalk. Prince Bully is a take on the bully fight from Mario 64, with you having to kick him into one of the clear pipes in the room and then kicking him in a squashed form. Boom Boom is the same fight as 3D Land, except he spins a little longer and turns slightly invisible. Pom Pom is also the same fight, but she summons clones to aid her. That's the only real difference. King Kathunk is a fairly fun fight, even if pathetically easy. He'll attempt to squash you, and then when he lands face down, you just need to jump onto the weak spot on his back. Motley Boss Blob has one of the dumbest, most on-the-nose names for any boss ever. Despite the stupid name, he's actually a pretty fun fight. He'll summon a bunch of blobs to become this boy. Then he'll try to jump on you, with the last jump splitting him into different blob counterparts along with the main guy that you have to jump on. Once again, an easy fight, but mechanically fun. Histocrat is a really good fight, with you having to climb up to the main snake while he sends out snakes that don't have a plate on their heads or boulders that rain down. Not only is the theme a banger, but it's a fight that requires even the slightest bit of effort. Then we have the Bowser fights. Let's start with 3D Land. It feels weird calling this a boss fight. It feels more appropriate to call it a boss encounter. Bowser will chase you and you have to make it to the end before he gets you to press a switch at the end, causing him to die. You aren't even directly facing him for the entire second half of the fight, but it's a pretty fun chase, not gonna lie. The Bowser fights in 3D World are pretty good though, with the first one having you hit soccer ball shaped bombs, or for my 2 European viewers, a football shaped bomb. Your guys' football has a name that makes more sense than our football, and I think that we should gaslight future generations into believing that American football was always called soccer. Anyway, the Bowser fight is really fun, as are all the Bowser fights. I think that having it be based around Bowser in a car is kinda weird, but it makes the final boss fight of the game all the more satisfying. Meowser is the greatest pun in the history of mankind. Much like the fight in 3D Land, the fight is based on Bowser chasing you. However, with him also using the Super Bell, it makes his attacks far more interesting as he chases you. Plus, he also uses the double cherry, which makes the fight a bit more interesting. Hitting the power block a bunch of times is really satisfying, and if you don't get there quick enough, Bowser's clones might be able to start breathing fireballs at you that you need to avoid in order to finish him off. So it manages to feel more like an actual boss fight rather than a chase segment. Overall, these are pretty neck and neck to my feelings on the bosses from 64 and Sunshine. They can be fun, but are generally easy. I recant that later games would far exceed them and change it to the Galaxy games and Odyssey far exceed them. Still fairly decent bosses here though.
Let's go!
This is a spiel that is present in all the 3D Mario retrospectives because it's important for the context of why I 100% these games. The 100% experience of a 3D platformer is one of the most important aspects of the game for me. While any percenting is fun and all, there's this specific desire to collect and do everything there is to collect and do, and with these types of games only. 100%ing Zelda is awful, but I could do Banjo-Kazooie all day. It's hard to put into words, but I think the main thing with it is because with most 3D platformers, you're already spending the whole game collecting things anyway, so the 100% one is pretty much just doing more of what I was doing the whole game anyway, as opposed to Zelda, which is entirely about the adventure, and collecting stuff is merely a side activity. The closest it comes to this is beating all 120 shrines, and I would gladly do that again. And now on to the video specific portion. With that out of the way, perhaps a controversial opinion, but I believe that Super Mario 3D World is the best Mario game to 100%. Period. Legitimately a perfect experience from start to finish. But let's talk about 3D Land first. 3D Land is pretty monotonous a lot of the time due to the fact that you once again need to 100% the game as both Mario and Luigi. And then there are the special worlds, which are just remixed levels made to be harder, which ends up meaning that if you want 100% the game once, it mostly feels like you're 100%ing it 4 times. It's not like getting all the star medals is enough because you also have to hit the top of the flagpole in every single level, which is a pretty ridiculous requirement. If you hit anywhere other than the top, then you will need to restart the entire level, which is needlessly frustrating. Other than that, I don't really have much to say. Grabbing the star medals is a fine enough process. There's none that I would say are astonishingly awful or anything. But there's nothing driving me to do it. The final level you unlock is nothing special, by far the weakest of the 4 currently released at these monitor murdering stages. It's still good, the challenges that you face are fun to go up against, but it's the only one of these that I ever beat on the first try, and I think that's telling. Of course, as already mentioned, my darling Super Mario 3D World has my favorite 100% experience of any Mario game. First of all, the fact that I don't dislike any of the stages in the game makes going through them to grab all of the green stars a lot of fun. It removes a stupid requirement to beat every single level as every single character. I am not playing this game for 100 hours straight just to beat every level as every character for bragging rights. That's 110% as far as I'm concerned. Anyway, the 4 collectibles are consistently fun to find on every stage. The leniency of the flagpole requirement due to the ability to climb to the top so long as you're Cat Mario / Luigi / Toad / Peach / Rosalina, and the fact that green stars aren't your reward for completing different missions, but rather for going out of your way to find them, just makes it a really easy and fun process. It manages to sidestep a lot of the issues that I have with the completion requirements from other Mario games. For the special worlds, rather than being just remixes of previously completed stages, it has a few remixes as well as a few original levels. This makes going through the post-game a much more comfortable experience that doesn't feel too padded or rehashed. On top of that, the final world of the game has 3 final tests for you to complete, which acts as a perfect finale for a brilliant game. Captain Toad's Fiery Finale, the ultimate conclusion to his subset of levels, Mystery House Marathon, housing the most difficult micro-challenges the game has to offer, all strung together over the course of roughly 5 minutes, and is a complete and utter embarrassment to mankind. And what you actually remember, Champion's Road. Champion's Road is my favorite of these insanely hard ending stages. It's long and puts so many different skills to the test, from simple platforming to this asinine section with the beat blocks that I swear is nearly impossible with anyone other than Peach, to jumping on a series of piranha creepers to a section made up entirely of dash panels. It's consistently throwing a fresh and engaging challenge at you as you endure it. It's a really solid level and still manages to keep up with the rest of the game's design philosophies. I don't have much else to say. I just think that 3D World is one of the best games I've ever had the pleasure to 100%, and 3D Land is probably the worst due to its monotonous and repetitive requirements. Let's wrap up, gamers. This was a shorter video, mostly because I really don't have much to say about either of these games. 3D Land is a perfectly fine, forgettable 3DS game that is more easily remembered as a 3DS's savior rather than being a great Mario game. And 3D World is an underappreciated gem that has some of the most solid, fun, fresh platforming of any game that I've ever played, along with easily the best and most fun 100% experience of any Mario game. It's not my preferred style for Mario, but to let that cloud my judgment would be silly. I still prefer the sandbox games to it, but this game comes pretty close. Make sure to like and comment so I get boosted in the algorithm and get a ton of subscribers, as well as subscribe for the next retrospective where I'll be looking at Super Mario Odyssey, which is currently the most recently released full-on 3D Mario game. It's going to be the one where I talk the most likely, so look forward to that. Thanks for watching, and have a good rest of the day/night.